What is going on, guys? Back for the Love of the Sports podcast. And today we're going to touch on an article. Kevin Garnett says the NBA players from 20 years ago could not play in the game today. And to be honest with you, man, I've been saying this for years. I just, I don't think that the older players are, capable of running up and down the court, shooting. I mean, look at the NBA today. You have to literally defend guys almost to half court. I mean, 20 years ago, even 15, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that was never a thing. This has been introduced with like a Steph Curry or a Damian Lillard, but even players like LeBron James now are shooting from the logo, Trae Young. All this is so new, and it's crazy because literally centers now are crossing guys up. And years ago, guys were in the paint, strictly in the paint. Centers were, blocking shots in the paint, clogging up that area. And there were no threat at all to shoot from the perimeter. Now, literally on almost every team, you have a big man that can shoot. I mean, look at all the top centers in the league. Joel Embiid can shoot. Nikola Jokic can shoot. Nikola Vucevic can shoot. I mean, these guys are shooting perimeter shots. It's kind of ridiculous, to be honest with you, because some of them shoot at better eclipses than guards. It's insane. And like I said, I don't know how people can think that, the level of play was better then than now. And I think Garnett hit this right on the head. There is no way, in my opinion, that players from the 90s, even the early 2000s, could keep up with the guys today. Who is going to cover Kevin Durant in the 90s? Please tell me. No one is that athletic. No one is that long. No one can shoot even close to as good as like a player like Kevin Durant. I mean, look at LeBron James now. He's shooting at 36 years old, the best by far from the three-point line. And literally, game in and game out, he's pulling up from the logo. It's like unheard of. Guys like Steph Curry, like I mentioned, Trae Young, they all, they're literally being defended at half court and in. And realistically, I don't know how you can actually stop those guys, because realistically, they're a threat from anywhere in from half court. Never mind from the 3-point line. They can, they can shoot from deep. They shoot like 90% from the the free throw line. They're literally unreal at finishing around the basket. They're like literally like a big man around the basket. You know what I mean? Like Kyrie Irving, Steph Curry. I've never seen finishers like that around the basket at their height. They're like 6'3 max, 6'4 max, and they're finishing around the basket as well as centers. And 20 years ago, that simply just wasn't the case. John Stockton wasn't shooting, great point guard in his day, terrific, great passer, great defender, like all-time leader in steals, but John Stockton was not shooting a three from the half-court line. It just wasn't happening. And at the time, the NBA, of course, was different. Now it's adapted to literally shooting. It's like a shooting expedition every game. But like I said, I just don't think players back then were up to speed. Everything is such modernized in the NBA. Medicine, cryogenic chambers, recovery, treatment, health, food they eat. Everything is so advanced now. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was not that. Guys were coming into the league before, stick figures, skinny guys. And now you coming out of the draft, you're like 6'11", 265, and you're strong. So that just wasn't the case before. Even Garnett, one of the best players he came out of high school, and he was like a pencil for his first couple of years. Then he ended up putting on a little bit. But for the whole career, Kevin Garnett was rather slim. He was a slim guy, very long, lengthy player. But he could never shoot like Durant. Realistically, a very similar body type to Durant. I don't think Durant's any shorter than him. I think they're both 6'11", 7 feet. And Durant is literally a threat anywhere on the court. So that's what I mean. That, the best centers before, I think the center position by far is the one position that's completely different today, because, like I said, Jokic, Embiid, Vucevic, even Andre Drummond can shoot. Just before, that was never the case. You got to defend centers now, three-point line extended. And realistically, back then, you have maybe one or two centers at most that could even shoot from the free throw line in. Look at years ago, Tim Duncan, one of the best power forwards. That guy was not a threat to shoot a three-point shot ever. Look how good he was at that. Imagine if he could. Dirk was really the only guy in the last 20 years before like Durant and all these guys got into the league that was a big guy that could shoot. He's by far the best big shooter of all time, in my opinion, Dirk Nowitzki. I still don't consider Durant a big. Even though he's 6'11", but Nowitzki played center and power forward his whole career. Durant's been kind of like small forward. Sometimes he plays kind of wherever, but yeah, I think Garnett's totally right. And, A lot of the players get offended from the 90s and 80s. They're like, they don't the thing is, before you could hand check, which was even worse because you could literally like back a guy down from the 3-point line. You could like throw him off you. And today you can't. You can't do that to foul. So it's even harder to defend now. And Garnett also mentioned that in that interview he had. It's like you can't hand check anymore. And now everything's very ticky-tacky foul. So literally now it's impossible to defend somebody. That's why guys are scoring 35 points a game. Look at Bradley Beal this year. He's scoring 35 points. And not to say that a lot of the players before couldn't. There's a handful that could. But I think the players now overall are just more experienced. They're more developed at this age. And they're just better. They're better players. Like I said, people used to compare like that 96 Bulls team or the 86 Celtics teams, as like the best teams ever. Like, there's no way, in my opinion, that any of those teams were even sniffing that Warriors team. That had Durant, Thompson, Curry, Draymond Green. Like, there's no way. The problem is no one can defend like that. Realistically, you had Scottie and you had Jordan, great defenders at the time. But who's going to cover Steph Curry? Who are you going to have on Durant? Scottie probably, in my opinion, would be on Durant if you were to have a series. Jordan, would you put Michael Jordan on Steph Curry? Possibly. I could see that happening. Who's going to cover Klay Thompson? He's going to destroy anyone who's on. That's what I mean. Like, the mismatches now from, 1 through 5 are just ridiculous. And that wasn't the case before. Even the backups before, think Danny Ainge, Danny Ainge wasn't on the Bulls team, but that's what I'm thinking of, like a backup point guard in the day. Danny Ainge, a small little white guy, trying to defend guy, pesky guy, like a small T.J. McConnell type. Realistically, there's no way, in my opinion, those guys could defend the guys today. And it's just one of those things where Garnett admits it, and it's such like a breath of fresh air to hear like a retired player speak so highly of like the players now, because like so many guys, Shaq, all these guys just talk so much shit about guys that are playing today and be like, they would never be able to survive in my era, it was way too physical. And to me, that argument is the worst, because I hate when people say they're pussies, they would never be allowed to play in the 90s, the 80s, the NBA is so soft. I'm like, first of all, basketball is a sport of finesse and skill, okay? So in the 80s and 90s, because you could hand check somebody, you're a better defender. No, you're not. You're not a good defender. You're just fucking pushing someone off your body. And the same thing with, people say they're soft, they foul. Everything's a foul now. You shouldn't be allowed to fucking clothesline somebody going to the basketball hoop. Like, that's not basketball. That's a foul. And people that say they miss that in basketball, that takes no skill to do that in sports. And I hate that argument, because I get into so many arguments with old timers and people I work with that are older. They're like, I can't watch the NBA anymore. It's soft. I'm like, that is not soft. It's just evolved to a different skill level. And the skill level now is shooting, perimeter defense. Like I said, it's way harder to defend now. Like I said, you can't even hand check somebody. You literally have to keep a guy in front of you the entire game. Guys that are faster, stronger, bigger than they were before, and you can't do any of that stuff anymore. So clearly the guys now are better, in my opinion, because if not, look at all the rules that have changed. Look at all the three-point line. Look at all the different, just numbers that have been going out. And also another thing I hate is when people always say, if they were shooting more in the 90s, they'd be just as good at it. No, they wouldn't, because why wouldn't they? If you're going to tell me guys in the 90s were as good as shooting, why wouldn't they? Wouldn't you want an extra point on each possession? Why would you shoot free throw shots or jump shots when you could sit behind the three-point line and shoot like Steph Curry does? Nobody wouldn't do that in any era. So that argument's dumb, in my opinion. And so many people continue to say that. And like I said, it's such a breath of fresh air that Garnett actually admitted the players now are better. Shaq has been talking so much garbage, man. I love Shaq. Shaq's one of the best players of all time, but he constantly is criticizing the players today, calling them soft, calling them this, calling them that. Every game, it's like, I watched the Mavericks game the other day. He's talking shit about Luka Doncic. The guy's 21 years old, literally just coming into the league, one of the best players, averaging 29, 9-9 in 2 years in a row. And you're talking bad about the guy. He's soft. He's doing this. He's that. I'm like, bro, what is Shaq? You're not in any position to talk. You don't want to admit that players now are impressive and they're getting better. And half of these older players just don't want to admit that. I used to love Paul Pierce, but even him, He literally won't admit it either. Pierce was not the most athletic guy in the world. He was very skilled, in my opinion. He was a good shooter. I think he would be good now. He just retired a couple years ago. But he speaks like so highly of the players back then, like just because he knows that the greatness is there now. He doesn't want to get surpassed by these young guys. And you can tell by the way he talks, almost like defensively, trying to talk about these guys. And I'm like, realistically, Paul Pierce was a good player. He has the opportunity to say his opinion on it, but like I said, these guys are just, no one wants to admit it. And like I said, Garnett was the first guy to admit it in like years, because it's true, and I totally agree with them. And I love the article, and there was a whole interview with Garnett. If you guys haven't seen it, go check it out. Kevin Garnett literally just had thoughts. I think it was New York Times was doing an interview with him, and it was just his thoughts on the NBA and how it's been modernized. And it was terrific read. Everyone should definitely read it. Very interesting, but, he hit a lot of nails on the head. Very good points. And Garnett's always been a guy, man, to speak the truth, speak literally what he's thinking. And what he was thinking was completely right, in my opinion. So I want to hear what you guys think about this. I think the guys today are much more skilled. They have a totally different perspective on basketball. Like I said, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. They have all those characteristics in one player now. Back in the day, they had one of those things. You were either like a monster, you're very strong. You probably weren't skilled back then. Now there's guys doing it all. And to me, that's much more skillful. Like I said, the biggest thing that I look at is centers. The centers then were not even close to the centers now. And the shooters then weren't close to the shooters. The shooters now are 10 times better than the shooters then. So those are the two positions I look at, shooters and big men. Everyone like small forwards, power forwards, pretty similar. But, those two positions stand out dramatically. So, like I said, guys, like, comment, subscribe. I want to hear what your opinions are on this. But I think it's a great topic for sure. Thanks, guys.